Welcome to this session on characteristics of globalization, how and the global sites and how their surroundings are getting shaped. In the previous sessions, we discussed about the reasons and how the globalization process and the reasons why and how they are evolved, and then later we discussed about the evolution of globalization in Indian urban context, and then later we discussed on post liberalization characteristics of post liberalization cities. Now let us look at more in closer detail about how this globalization sites are happening, how this globalization sites are characteristics and how they are actually shaped and how they are existing in contemporary cities. Saskia Sassen very interestingly she said global city is a complex space where multiple economies and work cultures come together to produce the complex organization and management infrastructure necessary to handle the running of global operations. Further, we need to understand the new types of tensions, segmentations and inequalities that are generated in this process and become visible in the space of the city. If we see how a global this globalization influenced companies and their related activities are getting located in our Indian cities. So, if we see the characteristics in more detail, so the let us take this case as this is a case in Lower Parel in Mumbai, where this area used to be a kind of earlier this used to be mill lands where the manufacturing it was a site of major manufacturing activity during the kind of till 70s, 1970s and 80s. After that, the decline of mill activity and the shifting of those activities to the peripheries, many of the industrial activities to the peripheries, created this more kind of spaces which were kind of available for urban development and regeneration. So, during the after the 1990s, after the globalization and the liberalization of the economy and the development of information technology, and these areas started redeveloping and they started housing these global companies. Today, this is a place where you will see this kind of patches of exclusive activities. So, you know these reds are the patches of all these global companies and their related real estate housing, which is housing this high end kind of attracting towards the professionals who want to work there, work in these areas and similar kind of activity. So, if we see what is the actual characteristics of these global sites, you will notice there is a clustering happening. When you see this whole lot of this companies come here, they create this networks to other companies, then they need also whole lot of support services, which is the things like the transport and catering and maintenance and cleaning, that kind of activities. They also need high end kind of support services. They need a whole lot of support from the accountants, legal professionals, technology professionals. So, they create these networks. So, they create these clusters. Okay. So, they get shared, this kind of this support activities get shared between them, that is one. And the another thing is also that this is creating a sense of agglomeration of this new center which is emerging. So, this becomes a trend for the new development. Similar developments also comes in this area. Next character is also the disengagement with the surroundings. These are also the islands of exclusive areas which need not essentially relate to the surroundings what is happening. So, okay. So, these are becoming like island spaces which are having this having this disengagement in the surroundings. At the same time they are also defensive, they are kind of citadels within this the current urban areas, where they since they are very they house a very different kind of people and a very different kind of capital and very different kind of they work in a different lifestyle, they live in a different lifestyle. So therefore there is a separation which comes from the surroundings, therefore they also tend to be defensive. This one should relate to this even through this globalization process, how this has happened during in the past, and how this is in the contemporary situation, this is the kind of exclusive separation with the surroundings is happening. And they are also disproportionate. If you see the kind of spaces, the per capita space used by a person is highly different from what is the just outside. A person who is living just outside will be using a very different kind of resources, he will be living in a very different kind of resource, whereas the people living in these enclaves are having highly disproportionate access to space and access to services, facilities, comfort. So that creates this kind of very distinct distinctions between these people at this communities. So at the same time there is also a temporal layered, at the same time you will see these patches are not exclusive always, they have this, they are temporally layered. So if you see during the daytime, the professionals, actually the managers, professionals, they work in these buildings, but in the night time it is actually the spaces of the people who come to service it, clean it, maintain it. So it is actually, it is not that this space is totally global at all the time, or its space is totally kind of linked to the global activities all the time. It is also temporal. There is a whole, it becomes a domain of a different kind of people in the night time. It is also totalized, these are also the totalized enclaves, we will see little more in later also, but these are complete in themselves, they tend to have all the facilities within themselves, and have very less dependency on the surroundings. As we discussed earlier, they also tend to become walled in, and also they wall out. So therefore they kind of create that separation and exclusivity. At the same time, it is very important and interesting, as Saskia Sassen also referred, that this is also leading to some kind of ethnic solidarity in the very close by areas. Often these activities are adjoining this whole lot of immigrant laborers who are coming and staying in this close by areas, and they are kind of trying to assert their role in the city. So they could, one is they tend to try to get jobs in this kind of global entities. On the other in other ways they are trying to assert their their location, citizenship in the city, and then the community. And also another interestingly, it's also this also leads to whole lot of sprawl and suburbanization, whole lot of spread of activities in the surroundings also happens. So now, having understood that, let us quickly get into how to see, visually see how these characters are working. So these are the kinds, as even Saskia Sassen said, these are the new frontiers within our urban areas. These are like frontier spaces where the locals are having very less influence on, the very locals will have very less ability to change them or influence on. So therefore they are kind of new frontiers. So these are the kind of landscape of spaces which which coexist. And you will often see this kind of juxtaposition. This is a redevelopment of existed the industrial chawl developments, and you will see this kind of this global companies very juxtaposition next to each other. And there is a whole lot of production of privatized public spaces which is happening. This is a photograph of a area of a IT area in Bangalore, where you will see a certain kind of public space this produced within this global spaces, which are of kind of explaining a character which these companies also, the way the companies also function. So it imposes a certain kind of order, it imposes a whole lot of written and unwritten rules how to behave in these public spaces, what to do, what not to do. So these are having these are changing the way how people behave in these public spaces also. They have a kind of major influence on what is a public space and what is the code of conduct in these public spaces. These are also this kind of totalized kind of blocks of the becoming the totalized blocks of the city, where everything is available and it becomes people go there and as if they have left the Indian context and they are living in another world. So, let us look at what are the locations, what are the soft locations where this global influences are likely to kind of influence. So, they are central business districts, emerging new business districts on the peripheries, shopping complexes, new typologies of public spaces, airports, international terminals, transport connectivity, and new business districts, new gated enclaves in the peripheries. So, now let us see what is how these global sites and immediate surroundings are actually spatially getting located. Here this is a kind of a plan of a street in Lower Parel, where you will see these huge floor space of blocks are the sites of global companies where they are getting located, and you will find the immediately outside on the street there is a whole lot of organically grown systems of commercial activities, and also there is a whole lot of informal systems which are happening in the street space. This is just outside, it's only a matter of one wall which divides this entire activity. How this explains us in nutshell how this kind of coexistence, how this economic coexistence actually translates to spatial coexistence, and what is the resultant characteristics which is evolving out of this in this urban spaces. Now let us see it in more closer in detail. You will see this whole kind of these activities which has evolved during these various phases of economic change. So, what happened is that earlier this was totally a street which was available for movement, and this used to be the footpath. Okay. And after this decline of the mill lands, there is a whole lot of people were jobless, and they were trying to find their ways to create their own jobs, and they started putting their activities on the footpaths, and eventually they, over a period of time, they got political support, and therefore they were almost given a kind of legitimacy to stay in those places. Now they have developed into almost like a temporary structure, almost permanent but still temporary, that kind of situation where they locate themselves. And again another layer you will see of another layer of more temporal kind of activities of vending activities happening, and then therefore the actual public space, the pedestrian is actually left to walk on the main space for the vehicles. So let us see this process also in terms of how it is in overall this soft things for soft sites happening. So this is an example of this in Mumbai, the sea link which was built to connect the areas of Bandra and to the towards the connecting towards the central business district of Nariman Point. So, what is happening here is that this kind of ceilings these kind of projects are actually focused towards this connecting this kind of elite car oriented people who lives in this Bandra and along the west coast, to connecting to these business districts. So, huge investments are going into this kind of projects to exclusively help these people to do their activity quickly. So, therefore, the entire city is actually working towards supporting them, whereas the same thing you will see this this kind of 8-lane expressway connecting Gurgaon to the airport of Delhi. So this, it's very important to understand that, separate that who is the beneficiary of this kind of major projects, and who is, what is that their what is their proportion in the overall population, and what is that actually this their I mean how this is changing, this kind of projects are changing the spatial structure of cities, and is it really worth it. So that is a question remains. And also cities are going through major branding exercises to attract to set a stage set for global companies to see the to as if the image has changed. These are kind of make believe spaces where which are created, so that as if the entire context has changed like this. Okay, so these becomes very important sites of global interactions, where this becomes the kind of phase of the tend to become, to show that as if it has become the phase of urban condition. Similarly, in Mumbai there is a whole lot of waterfront developments, and at the same time it's another location of these global activities are also shopping malls. So it is not that just the capital and people and technology, these are not the only ways of globalizing, but is also the products. So when these global products come to Indian cities, they demand a certain kind of condition where they will get located. So you will see this kind of exclusive malls which are kind of locating this kind of high end brands, and the entire mall is actually shaped to such that they will have to come up to the level that they can accommodate these products. So it's like, this product demand this kind of a context. So on the other side, it is also while the products are demanding this kind of certain kind of stage set, the from the local conditions are also trying to grow up to that, to create that setting to attract them. So these are kind of again the make believe bubble spaces which are creating this so called the illusion of a global living. These so we can see this sequential experience of how you experience a product, and how a global product needs to be experienced in spaces, or actually or creating this production of this public spaces. These are also, it's very important to note that these are also the places where the citizens come close to these products. Here is a place where they need not buy also, but they can see them. So this is quite a lot of kind of shaping the spaces. So now let us look at the architecture of the space of flows. This is the kind of spaces which are created in this global enclaves, where the message is almost silence. It's almost don't want to reveal what it is. It's almost silence. So there has been quite some interesting discussions on this. As Iblings said, architecture reflects to the new frame of reference will no longer be dictated by the unique, the authentic or the specific, but by the universal. As Manuel Castell says, architecture whose forms are so neutral, so pure, so diaphanous that they do not pretend to say anything, and by not saying anything they confront the experience with the solitude of the space of flows. As even John Short explained this, spoke about this blandscape which are creating by this homogenization. This homogenization is also because of the consumerism which is also flattening or the kind of flattening situation along the urban conditions, the global situations. And as Markag says that super modernity produces, architecture has become a careful use of medium to get this globally understandable image, as if otherwise it will not be understood by the global. So as even Gautam Bhatia said, these are the spaceships which came from the sky and got located in our areas, but they may be more relatable to the globe, but not to the local. So there is a whole lot of image building exercise going. People sit in very remote areas and take decisions what should be the image, and companies are desperate to make attempts to achieve what should be the, how to build an iconic image for themselves. And finally, what is happening to the global citizen? What is, he is under constant pressure. He is living a life of having the life where it is flooded by this whole lot of attention seeking and this kind of desperate kind of developments, and he has to perform to be able to survive in this kind of conditions. This also creating a need for a certain sophistication of life. You know, in a current urban situation, it is very important to have a certain sophistication to survive. You know, it's a play, it's about time, it's about ability to kind of do certain activities such within a certain time frame, such that he can survive. You know, he is having this urban space and this time, and how a citizen is able to sophisticate himself to survive is a challenge. So at the same time, it's very important to see how the locals are also asserting the actual local people who pre-existed this kind of urban global influences are also kind of asserting themselves. These are the kind of public spaces which is juxtaposition them, and they conduct their functions. It is very interesting to see that locals are also asserting their position in the city through two ways. One is through permanent ways, where they are trying to redevelop, as we see as we saw in this image, this kind of redevelopment of this this chawls and this informal settlements. All these are happening by the local assertions. The local people, they make nexus with the politicians to and the builders, businesses, to ensure that they get their housing in this global city. At the same time, they do also this temporal means. You know, these are you can at least in a year to 2-3 days of the city, the city is totally flooded by this kind of this ephemeral functions, where the entire city comes to stop, and this whole lot of religious related activities asserted by the locals takes over. So as interestingly Lingam said, religion and ethnicity do become an important vehicles for articulation of people's identity. The ways in which they mobilize, resist, marginalize, or attempt to consolidate their positions in the city. These are the images of how the global is being asserted been by the locals. This is also leading to a whole lot of kinetic system of city which is developing, which Rahul Mehrotra has discussed this in detail. How he says that how this parallel system of this kinetic city has evolved against this formal system which is existing developed by the formal systems. It's, I quote here, as Rahul Mehrotra says, architecture is not more only spectacle of city, nor it compromise the single dominant image of the city. It contrasts festivals such as Diwali, Dasra, Navratri, Muharram, Durga Puja, Ganesh Chaturthi, and many more have emerged as the spectacles of the kinetic city. Their presence pervades and dominates the popular visual culture of Indian cities. The grand adjustment that often challenges the formal production of architecture, city as an elastic urban condition and not a grand vision. So the meaning of the space is not stable. Spaces get consumed, reinterpreted, and recycled. The kinetic city reinterprets the static city to create the new spectacle. While this kind of processes are happening within the urban areas, there is also this increased placelessness of fragmented development are also happening on the peripheries. Now let us look at these two current extreme systems of city building and how they are existing in the current context. So if you see, this is an example of Bandra Kurla complex, and Dharavi is an excellent example of how they are so close to each other, and they are the representatives of so different forms of city building, planning and perceiving and building. So, both the systems actually evolved by kind of reclaiming the water. Okay. So, therefore, they've gone through a very similar kind of a process, and they have both are having their in their own ways, they are both are globalized. You know, even the activities of Dharavi has a whole lot of global activities, and even Bandra Kurla complex was specially mentioned, specially built to locate these global companies. So, this is an excellent, it is an interesting way to understand how these two divergent systems of perceiving cities and building cities are happening. So, here we will see the Bandra Kurla complex is whatever Bandra Kurla complex is not, is what Dharavi is, and whatever Dharavi is not is what Bandra Kurla complex is. So, therefore, they do not allow these systems to penetrate into each other. If you go in Bandra Kurla complex, you will not get a street food anywhere. The people who are working here will have to really go far distances to have their simple food for their meals. Whereas in Dharavi, they have been the people have been really kind of able to, they are kind of defending their own way of city building against the formal way of city building. They have been resisting the formalizing or the so called formalizing, the so called rebuilding in terms of formal terms. So, they are kind of, they do not, they defend their own system, and they are totally fighting against this formal system, whereas the Bandra Kurla complex, the formal system is totally fighting against, not allowing the informal or the organic way of building cities. So, in the if you see in the formal system, the infrastructure is developed first and it waits for the users to come in. Okay. Whereas, in the people generated cities, the user generated settlement of Dharavi, you will see the infrastructure enters at the last stage of the development cycle. Okay. But it is very important to note that both of them have compromised on the environment. Both the systems have kind of disturbed the how the natural systems exist in this place. For example, the flooding which happened in the past decade actually was actually because of the whole lot of reclamation activities happened. It reduced the flow of the river, and therefore, it caused major flooding. So, it is very important to note that there is a whole lot of this kind of disturbance is also happening to the nature. So, now, having seen this very divergent system of plan designing and building our situations, let us look at what actually Indian system is about. I mean, it's just an attempt. It's an attempt. Let us make an attempt to understand, is it, what is this Indian system is actually characteristic of, and how it is a system of coexistence and mix rather than this kind of isolated systems. So, here it is very important to see how this in the current context, the fusion spaces are evolving in Indian context, or in rather in lot of global context. As Manuel Castells and others are discussing, that a basic tenet of globalization is being in a networked city. The need for adjacency is reduced, and primary modes of exchange of information are creating fusion spaces that could make multiple layers of functions. Fusion spaces could increase the comfort, versatility and efficiency of the space itself, and the users reflects it. The network spaces is helping spatial restructuring through fragmentation and then recombination to increase efficiency. The process has potential to gradually reform the way individuals, families, communities and companies engage with the city. Though network city have not led to dispersal of functions across geographies, instead they agglomerate to facilitate basic face to face meetings, sharing of common ancillary resources are continuing to be the crucial for their location. So, this system of network cities are creating new opportunities in the way cities can be replanned, and how even the individuals can, how they can take choices of how they can locate themselves in the city and how they can be more efficient, you know. So, because of the change systems of adjacency. At the same time, let us look at what is this Indian street, and as an example of what is an Indian so called the system. So, generally it is normally it is discussed that Indian city spaces are very ambiguous, and the public spaces are, there is no order in, or it is a general, but actually you will see there is an order in the chaos, as we discussed earlier. These all evolving because of a certain kind of history and certain kind of systems which are have developed to support a certain kind of people and support certain kind of systems to coexist within the same situation. So, you will see, go in further detail, you will see how these are providing a alternate kind of economy, a kinetic a system which is supporting a whole lot of an alternate kind of system to coexist along with this global kind of systems. And also the, in current situation you will also see whole lot of public spaces in post liberalization happening through negotiation. This kind of negotiated spaces, which is actually parking lot, also becomes a public space for playing in on the different days. And there is also this whole lot of this who occupies a space, and this is a negotiation, constant negotiation between who occupies and when, and who goes back, and who, when, and they come back, and how they assert themselves. At the same time, we have this whole sense of blanket approach to towards this viewing our cities. It is very important to get out of this blanket approach and look at the kind of very specific situations. And also it is very important that there might be a very intention might be there, but there might be an intention, but what it actually intends to, what it actually results to create, how, what kind of conditions it creates in the surroundings is very important. This kind, if this kind of built forms keep happening in our cities, then obviously our streets are not, or the surroundings or the commons are going to lose their importance. So, finally, whose city it is? Who owns the city? Who owns our urban areas? Is it this a small section of global people who have a strong influence, or is it this huge masses who conduct their own functions in everyday activities? Is it what is the actual question of who owns the city and who has the right to decide what should be the design and what should be the kind of development and how they need to be integrated. So, it's the role of urban design I would like to summarize here is, Indian cities are characteristic of very diverse urban uneven levels of development, and it is going to continue in the nearby future as well. Therefore, the mix in everything is the basis of Indian system, which is already existing. The mix into everything, any system can mix into anything. That is what the system which is already exists, and it needs to be taken forward. It is also about boundaries, how we develop our boundaries, how the domains of the boundaries are going to help this mix. And multiplicity and variety is another important character. And of course, cities are always about people. The people need to be at the center. So, therefore, I would like to conclude by saying this: the state of mind of urban designer in this context, we are in a complex state of confusion of partial reflection of what reflects and what happens behind the cause of it. So, this it is very important to see that how we understand what is there in the current context and what it actually reflects versus what actually it is. And therefore, I would say that any form of development, the search for an urban designer, everyday urban designer, could be any form of development, could be argued as a disruption. Therefore, in an everyday search could be to build a symbiotic relationship between the most likely and the most even unlikely systems of life. So, I would like to conclude here at that, and hope this was helpful to understand the contemporary urban situations and how this impact of globalization are shaping our cities. Thank you.